give you an update on what's been happening in Washington, D.C. But really talk. And I know that we're not alone. Barbara talks about what's been happening out there. But ultimately, we wanted to make sure we're listening to you and we're hearing you because we'd like to be able to be your voice in Washington. And so some of the things that we're trying to focus on, and some of the things at least that I'm hearing, and I'd love to hear from you, what your thoughts are, is we're still hearing from people that jobs in the economy, there's probably another one thing that's impacting people. And the fact is that we still have too many people that are out of work. We see the unemployment rate that's coming down. But we're looking at a labor force participation rate that's still extremely low, right? So like 62.8%. So again, pretty low labor participation rate. We've got sections of the 10th district where the unemployment rate is significantly high. So we do have a jobs fair, which I want to make sure we alert, and I'll probably make an announcement again. We've got a jobs fair in August, I think. Victoria, what's the date on that one?
Yeah, our jobs fair is August 18th from 4 to 7 p.m. It's going to be at the Round Lake Park District Sports Center.
So again, if you do not have the flyer, please make sure you grab a flyer. Please help us publicize what it is, make sure you get it out to people. And again, we're going to have a good chunk of employers there, and our idea is that we want to make sure that more people have an opportunity to work. So as we look at this, one of the things that I'm hearing a lot from people is that people are sitting around the kitchen tables and they're worried they're falling behind. The cost of food continues to rise, the cost of higher education, uncertainty around their jobs. Do they have a good job? Is it going to be there for more than 6 or 12 months? Are their kids going to be able to get a good job? Are they going to move back here? The uncertainty around retirement, also a concern. And so those are some of the things that, again, as we look at it, I think we have an opportunity here in the 10th district. The 10th district, for those that aren't aware, is actually the 4th largest manufacturing district in the country. Most people don't realize that. So manufacturing is really important, but it's also important as we look around here is our transportation infrastructure. Talk to a number of people in the community. One of the concerns they have is, man, there's a lot of congestion. How are we able to move things around? Right? How many people have issues just kind of with the roads? Right?
Center Street.
Center Street. So, and then we also, we look at the rail, right? So we're going through an appropriations process right now, and let me just tell you that I am a huge proponent of transportation infrastructure. How do we get our raw materials in and our finished product out in our manufacturing community? How do we move people around? So right now, as we look at the Highway Trust Fund, right? A lot of people want to take mass transit, for instance, out of the Highway Trust Fund. I think that is an absolutely wrong approach. We need to focus on how we make sure that we keep mass transit here. Mass transit is super important because if you think about Chicago, and you think about just you look at the roads and you look at freight and all the different things that's coming through Chicago, and you jump on the expressway, if we didn't have mass transit, we'd have an increased congestion of 50%. Now, studies have been done of congestion and the cost that it has. And we just had a hearing the other day in the Ways and Means Committee. We were talking about transportation. And they estimate that it's over $120 billion is lost in productivity because of congestion. UPS did their own study. They said for every additional 5 minutes of idle time, it cost them about $100 million. Now, when we look at our transportation infrastructure, when we look at, for instance, the rail, there are some lines here that takes an additional 15 minutes because of our outdated switches. We've got equipment on our rail lines that actually goes back to the Roosevelt administration, and it's not FDR. Okay, so it's really old stuff. But that's 15 minutes potentially each way. And if you have 15 minutes each way, that adds up to about 10 and a half hours if you are a regular commuter each and every month. That's a quality of life issue. That's an extra half an hour a day that you can spend with your kids, playing catch in the backyard. Just improving your overall quality of life. We want to make sure that we're doing that. And so that's one of the reasons why we focus on those things. When I look at the 10th district, I see a huge opportunity for us. 4th largest manufacturing district. And yet we know, how many of you know businesses that have picked up and left Illinois? How many of you know people that have picked up and left? Right? We have all the assets here to be leading the country. Truly leading, not just the Midwest, but leading the nation. And when you think about that, when you think about those entrepreneurs and where they want to go, you think about the small business owners, because when we talk about jobs in the economy being that important step, 2/3 of all net new jobs are created by the small businesses. right, folks right up and down the street. One of the things, what are they gonna look for? I would argue one of the things that they look for is it a good place to raise my family? Well, I'm at Grayslake, is this a good place to raise your family? Mayor Nodds said yes. I'm sure he's not the only one that thinks so. You bet, this is a great place to raise a family. How about our schools? We look around the 10th district, we've got some of the best schools in the country. And yes, we've got some that need some help. But that's also one of the big key ingredients for it. That's another big key ingredient to look at our schools. One of those other key ingredients, transportation infrastructure, how to get our raw materials and our finished product out. How about our open lands and our wetlands? Is that our most important? We have incredible resources. If you look at the Lake County Forest Reserve, right? Incredibly important. How about the chain of lakes? Right? The chain, important. Really important. Is that one of those things that's a quality of life thing? It's one of those things that's attractive for people if they want to come? I think so. Our Great Lakes, absolutely. How about culture? I think it's important. We live close to one of the greatest cities in the nation. Actually, we're in between Milwaukee and Chicago, so that's a competitive advantage. Right? These are really positives. And yet, one thing that we've been missing is we've been missing a business-friendly environment. Right? We know that's one of the reasons why we see people going to Wisconsin or Indiana or picked up and left and go south. And frankly, we know they're not going to Wisconsin or Indiana because of land. Right? That's not a big draw out there for those things. But they do have that business-friendly environment, and frankly, we're seeing that economic impact. So as we talk about how do we make sure that more tax dollars are flowing in here to allow us to be able to deal with our first responders, to be able to deal and do the things to give Brett and the village board the tools necessary to do some of the things that they want to do locally, we want to talk about raising the tide, bringing more of those businesses here, taking the burden off of the homeowner with property taxes. We had a meeting with some local elected officials earlier, and I can guarantee one of the things that they hear, because I hear it all the time, because I heard it just at the fair we had last weekend. So, constituents and homeowners, don't raise my property taxes. Right? Whatever you don't raise my property taxes, because here in Lake County, not only do we have some of the highest property taxes in the state, we have some of the highest property taxes in the country. So, that's one of the things that I know is a concern for a lot of people. But some of the things that we're doing here more locally in Washington, we've been focusing in on a couple of things. One of the things, just as a short, I think Washington's working. Now's the time when you participate. So, I mean, there's no question as we look at the gridlock that's going on in Washington, D.C., I think that's a huge problem. And I think that's a problem because there's so much more that unites us than divides us. And yet most people want to talk about what divides us as opposed to what's unites us. And I will tell you that one of the things that happened early this year, which I think is important, is something that we talk about, the doc fix. How do we pair physicians that treat those that take Medicare? It's important. I think it's important. Bipartisan solution that came out, passed with over 380 votes in the House of Representatives, so that we know and that doctors have that certainty. It was something that was passed along year after year. It's kind of a short-term fix for the last 17 years. We were able to do it and keep it done permanently, which I think is important. How many of you think that's at least a positive step forward? Right? We have some sort of opportunity to how we're paying our seniors, our doctors, we're treating seniors. The other thing that we've been talking about more recently is the trade bill. And so as we talk about trade, I think trade is going to be important for us. It's certainly important for us here in the 10th district. Right? So as we talk about that, again, the fourth largest manufacturing district in the country. And so we want to make sure that we're talking about American trade. Right? How do we make sure that we're making it here and shipping all over the world? Because that's going to be something that helps out our consumers, helps out our businesses, our workforce. We want to make sure that it's accountable. We want to make sure that it's transparent. Things that I think are going to be important. So this is we can talk about a lot of things. But I much prefer to hear what's happening locally. We've got some local elected officials here. So if you'd like to talk about that, again, we've done several town hall meetings, which I think is important to be able to come out and have a conversation with people, and we'll continue to do those. So who's got some questions that they want to go over and talk about? Yes, sir.
First of all, Bob, I like the conversation about focusing in on what we have in common versus what we don't have in common. I like that. But you use the term, and I really consider this very interesting. You use the term business-friendly environment. So what I need you to do is help me understand what you mean, and maybe give me an example of a business-friendly environment.
Well, I think one of the things that we're talking about in terms of a business-friendly environment is we talk about regulation, right? We want regulation. Regulation is important. We want it to be smart and tailored as opposed to just moron. And so that would be one of the things. When we talk about trying to make sure that we give incentives to businesses to try to come in, because they're going to create a lot more tax revenue if we're able to do some incentives for them. States are able to do that. So we know that they're doing that up in Wisconsin. We know that they're doing down in Indiana. But those are just some of the things. So it's not, let's get rid of regulation. We do want it to be smart. Yes, sir.
Speaking of trade, I've been watching the goings on in Washington for the last few weeks, where Republicans are doing something, Democrats are doing something, the president's doing something, and it seems like there's a lot of conflict. There's a conflict with me because I don't quite understand the whole process.
Okay.
You get so many different interpretations in the mass media, the electronic media, whatever the case is. Can you give a very precise little, make me smart?
Well, I can certainly try. I know that's it. I can certainly try to do some of those things. So, as we talk about trade, and again, I think it's important when we think about trade. This first step in the process is basically giving the president the authority to negotiate a deal. It's called the Trade Promotion Authority. For the past 50 years, every president has had a trade promotion authority. And so I want you just to put on your cap for a second and think about this. If you're doing a deal, you wouldn't sit across the table from someone who doesn't have the authority to do that deal. Right? That's what's happening right now. If we don't give the president the authority to be able to do this deal, which again is Earl Blumenauer will tell you, and others, Democrats from Oregon, this has got the most environmental protections in this trade promotion authority than any other deal to date. Right? But if we don't give them the authority, who else is going to write the rules? If the United States isn't there, who's going to be able to write those rules? I would argue it's China. It's the last entity out there controlling what's going on in the trades. So what the TPA does is it gives the president the authority to be able to negotiate whatever the deals are. There are 150 different parameters in the Trade Promotion Authority that Congress has inserted saying we'd like to have all of these things done. One of those things actually is something that I think is important, and it's talking about the BDS movement, boycott, divestiture, and sanctions of Israel. So we put those in there to say we want to encourage our partners to avoid the BDS movement. There's some penalties in there. So the Trade Promotion Authority is the first step. It just allows us to negotiate. The second piece that's part of it is something called the Trade Adjustment Assistance, the TAA. Trade Adjustment Assistance basically provides resources to those that may be displaced because of any trade agreement that is reached. And so I think that's important, okay, to make sure that there's a safety net, a safeguard there. So what has ended up happening is that there was those that played some political games in Washington. The president is the one that's really been after it and wanting to do it. I'm hopeful that we will be able to pass a trade promotion authority that is attached with it to have the trade adjustment assistance. Once that's done, then they can go out and look at the trade deals that are out there.
Were each of his predecessors given that authority when they took office? Or if not, what bothers me is he's been sitting there for 6 years and has not had an authority. Or am I reading this wrong?
So this one would be for 7 years. So they've had some in the past. So again, it's not just for trying to let you do it. So it's usually for about a 7-year period. At least that's what this one is. Yes, sir.
Congressman Bold, you spoke about young people, particularly one of the leaders that doesn't lack a job. So as a recent grad, I decided I would get some better to stay on. And the response to that was can you talk about some legislation you might pass to both incentivize entrepreneurs and businesses like myself, or to support people in this progress?
Yep. So one of the things that the first bill that I introduced was something called the Startup Act. It's a bipartisan bicameral, meaning it's House and Senate bill. And really what it does is it's talking about the fact that we're educating the best and the brightest from all over the world here in the United States. They may come from India, they may come from Singapore, they may come from Germany, but they're going to Harvard, MIT, and Stanford, and other places. As soon as they graduate with a master's degree or a PhD, what do? We kick them out to go compete against us, which to me seems like the wrong approach. What we should be saying is, no, we'd like you to stay here, help innovate here, create the next patent here, create more American jobs. And that's exactly the type of thing that I think, again, Republicans and Democrats alike should be able to get on. Because what ends up happening is we end up sending them over and they start to take American jobs away from us. If they're in Canada or Singapore or Germany or some other place. So that's would be a piece of legislation that's certainly I support. One of the other things that I think is important, something that I had supported in the past, is something called Main Street Fairness. And really what we're talking about there is that many of you might have been and you're out there shopping. You might have been at Best Buy, or you might have been at some other store. And somebody looks at it, they try out a beautiful shirt, they put it on, they check it out, and then they put it back on the rack, and then they turn around on their phone and press purchase. Well, obviously our Main Street folks here, they have to have the manpower, they have to have the employees, they have to turn the lights on, they have to have the overhead. There's a cost to all those things. On the internet, not so much. So what the Main Street Fairness Act would do is actually not create a new tax, because the tax is already there. It's truly supposed to go like that. So again, it would allow them to use a lot of those small businesses that are down Main Street. Very much in favor of that, because it allows them to be able to keep our income. We want to allow them, because it's important for me to make sure that these businesses that are right up and down the street have the ability to compete. We want them to thrive. We want them to stay here. There are 29 million small businesses in our country. If we can create an environment where half of them can create a single job, think about it.
I run an online business, so what about potentially finding some consistency across sales tax, across state lines?
So one of the things is, especially for smaller businesses, if you're online, there would be a safe harbor that you would have to do anything until it's a certain threshold, and then you would be forced to just wait. And there's a program right now, an online application that would do that for you. So it would be fairly, my understanding is it would be fairly easy for you to comply if you reach that threshold, which I think is, what was $1 million, I think it's 1.5. Yes, sir.
Yeah, along the same lines about encouraging businesses to flourish in this country. What are your thoughts on the corporate federal tax?
Yeah.
In regards to like Switzerland or they're moving over there, they don't have a huge brick and mortar to move over there, but the fact they can just put their shingle, hang their shingle, and it's a 12% tax rate.
Well, there's no question, as we look at our corporate taxes, we've got the highest corporate taxes in the industrialized world. And people are making decisions based upon that. And so I do think that we need to have overall comprehensive tax reform, not just for businesses, but individuals as well. And one of the things that I think we've got to do fairly quickly is we've got to talk about international tax reform. Why? Because many of our businesses, many of our 10 district businesses are here, and they're actually takeover targets for foreign companies. And so what we want to do is we want to create that tax code that enables them to be able to compete in the world. I do think corporate tax reform is necessary and needed. And again, bringing down that overall rate and eliminating some of the loopholes that are out there. And that's obviously tough to do. But it's one of the things that I think is necessary. And really what we ought to be talking about is how do we make it competitive? Right? Regardless of the rate, we want to make it competitive so that we are able to compete with our neighbors. Right? If you look at Canada, Canada's tax rate is far lower than the United States. We want to be able to compete. And frankly, if we can compete, we're actually attracting more businesses here. We're going to see not only local municipalities flourish, but we're going to have more tax dollars that are going to come into the federal treasury. Yes, sir.
All these things you talk about are marvelous. The thing that I don't hear enough about health is the deficit.
Deficit and the debt.
And, well, the debt, really, not the deficit.
That's the big one.
Right, and that items here are being about what is being done done about that, and that we're probably 10 years away from defaulting when we're $1 trillion mark. So that, you know, it's not a big problem for me, because I'll probably be dead and gone.
Well, let's hope not.
But, you know, children, grandchildren, and whatever, and, you know, there just doesn't seem to, that I can see, the will to say, you know what, we need to cut this, we have enough revenue, but what are we doing about some of these bloated, redundant programs? And that, you know, if something's being done or worked on, it's certainly not getting out to someone like me.
Well, let me just, well, first of all, how many of you think that the debt is an issue? Me too. No question about that. I mean, we're looking at $18 trillion. One of the things that I like to do when I'm talking into the schools, and certainly I talk in the high school classrooms, I often ask them, you know, about the deficit and about the debt. And I ask them why it's important. And oftentimes they kind of look at me puzzled. I said, you know, is it 18 trillion, why not 50 trillion? Or pick a number. So why is it important? Why should it be important to you? And then finally somebody raises their hand and says, well, because we're going to have to pay for it. I said, exactly right. So the decisions that are being made today are going to impact this next generation of the people that oftentimes don't even have a chance to vote right now. And so it does have significant impacts, and frankly, we've got to look at both sides of the equation. There was a budget that was proposed by 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats that was based on Simpson Bowles. So Alan Simpson, Erskine Bowles, many of you might remember that budget. Alan Simpson was a Republican senator from the state of Wyoming. Erskine Bowles was president of the chief of staff. So there was Republicans and Democrats on it, but those were the 2 co-chairs. 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats co-sponsored the first bipartisan budget of a generation. Anyone guess who the co-sponsors? Okay, guesses?
You.
You said me.
I did.
There you go. That's exactly right. Yes, I was one of them. So I was one of those that stood their neck out and said, you know what? This is going to have to be a bipartisan solution to get us out of the mess that we're in. Because we can't just tax our way out of it, and we can't just cut our way out of it. And so it's going to have to be some of both that we're going to have to do eventually. We want to talk about how do we really solve this problem. And the thing that we're normally not talking about is we're not talking about growth. And we're not talking about how do we grow our economy. How do we make sure that, again, more dollars are flowing into our federal treasury? And we need to make sure that whatever we're doing, we're not, in essence, deterring businesses from growing and thriving, right? Because when businesses grow and thrive, the higher that next individual, that individual's going to be able to pay taxes. So we want to make sure that they're doing that. Frankly, selfishly, we want to make sure that they're doing that here in Illinois. More specifically, we want to be selfish and say we wanted to do it here in the 10th district. The mayor wants us to make sure that it's happening here in Grayslake. Right?
Yeah, we're debt free.
It's all good.
I'm new to this community, and I've been walking around downtown
Yeah.
into,
It's a nice community.
Very nice, I love it. But a lot of people went out of business because the taxes were too high, they couldn't afford the rents, actually. What can be done about that? I mean, Piggly Wiggly went out of business and another store took over. As a senior, I could walk there from my house.
So Piggly Wiggly was a slightly different situation than some of the others that had, the landlord decided in that particular instance, the owner of the building decided she could operate the grocery store at a better margin, and so she discontinued the lease with Piggly Wiggly. She was not able to operate the grocery store because she thought she would sit back foreclosed on her. So that was not quite a tax situation she was interested in. I think the gentleman over here talking about being business friendly. One of the things that we need, we have property taxes are necessary to support the school districts, the park district, the fire district, etc. When we brought FedEx into town, we worked with the county and the school districts to get them to lower property tax rate over a certain amount of time to encourage them to settle here, because they were also moving to Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a lower tax profile overall. So to be business friendly, one of the things we have to do is try to get all local units of government to work together so we get industry or retail, perhaps we can get some of the local districts that aren't as impacted to give up some of the property tax rate of lower ones so that we can entice them in. So
state government for doing different infrastructure projects is good as well. For example, the work we've been doing on Lake Street, we've been able to get federal funding for about 75% of that. So that leaves us with more property tax revenue to put elsewhere to do some of the economic incentive grants that we've done, like we did for the Dollar General. And we offered to the dental place on Route 83. They're bringing several jobs to town. And we're looking, just having very preliminary conversations with emails for their second store. That could bring about 60 jobs to town, talking economic incentive there. So because we're debt free, we're able to get some of these loans, and then that can help us get more business friendly and try to lighten that burden of these businesses. But there are a lot of moving parts to that. So does that help answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Yes, ma'am.
What
You have a
is,
question for the mayor?
You know, we live in Warren Township, but sometimes it can take us 20 to 30 minutes to get to Grayslake. Do you get federal money if they could put 53 through?
So that,
Can we get money for that?
I'll talk a little bit about 53, but I'll defer back to action because there are some federal aspects to that. Sorry, I apologize, my voice is kind of soft. Route 53 right now is being looked at by the State Tollway Authority. They would be the agency to fund Route 53 and put it in. As a village, we wouldn't get any money directly. That would help some of the traffic flow though, because it would offer a bypass to 120 that's going to run to the east. We have had very good support from the Congressman for the things necessary to help fund Route 53 and bring it forward. Our county board chairman, Aaron Lawler, is working very hard to put together a consensus. In fact, he's drafting a letter that he wants the mayors in the county to sign to help show Springfield and the Tollway Authority that we're supporting Route 53. And it would be helpful for overall traffic flow in the county. Well, many of what we're doing as a village is we try to take advantage of every opportunity we can to get federal grants to expand our own roads. Lake County has a program that's what they're expanding. St. Peterson and Washington, and we perform in partnership with them where we can to make a difference in the overall traffic flow. You may remember Lake County went through a special gas tax a little while ago, and they're collecting money on that. That's where you're seeing the expansion of Washington and Peterson, et cetera. So any help we get from the federal government is appreciated in that. So then you want to talk about it?
We can talk about 53, we can talk about expansion of 83. I mean, honestly, this comes back to what we were talking about earlier, and talk about the need for our transportation infrastructure. And one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we focus on our appropriations process to make sure that we have a long-term surface transportation. One of the things that I've done in talking to some of the stakeholders at Metra, at PACE, with the RTA, CTA, is they'd like to have a long-term surface transportation bill because, as you know, when you're dealing with things, if you have some long-term certainty, it makes it easier. So that you're not buying one rail car, you're buying 12 rail cars. It's a much lower cost to be able to buy the 12. You can be able to look around the corner and have some certainty. They can plan on it much better, and it allows you to stretch those dollars even further. So we need to have a long-term surface transportation bill. Unfortunately, I can't go in there and say, this money's for Route 53. We basically have dollars that flow into the state. Our hope is that the state realizes that 53, which is a priority, for CMAP and others, that the money's coming in for that project. Mayor's absolutely right. The Illinois Tollway Authority is the one that's kind of leading the charge on it, but we want to make sure that that's a project that gets done. Not only a safety issue, but obviously one that is hopefully will drive additional commerce. Yes, sir.
What are your thoughts about climate change, and specifically, do you support a revenue-neutral carbon tax?
Okay, so the question was on climate change, and you support the revenue-neutral thing on carbon tax. I will say that there's no question that I believe that climate change is real. And I do believe that we need to be focusing on how do we take steps to reduce our carbon footprint. What I've said before is that I think that there's a business case to be made, and we need to make that business case out to many of the businesses that are out there in terms of how do they lower their carbon footprint and get the payback for doing so. And the other thing that I think that we can be doing on that is we talk about renewable energy. Been very much out in front, trying to make sure that we are promoting wind and geothermal and all sorts of renewable energies out there, because I think it's important. We don't know what the next new thing may be. What we do know is what should be uniting us is we want
to have energy independence, and we want to make sure that we're leaving not only the nation, but our environment better for the next generation. So I do think as we look going forward, we've got to be able to start cracking the code on that. My first step, at least I would argue, is make a business case to many of the businesses on why they should be making those steps and why it would be beneficial for them to do so. Yes, ma'am.
As a young person, the single biggest issue for me politically is the corrupting influence of money in politics. So I was wondering where you stand on election reform. Our current system incentivizes wealthy donors and special interests and lobbyists to flood elections with undue amounts of money. So yeah, I was wondering where you stand on that, and specifically HR 20, the Government by the People Act, which if you're not familiar with it, sets up a voluntary matching fund that the politicians can opt into that would match small donor contributions up to $150, 6 to 1. That way politicians can be more accountable to citizens and their constituents rather than lobbyists and social interests.
I'm not familiar with HR 20, but certainly we'll look into it. What I will tell you with regard to money in politics, my goodness gracious, has spent a tremendous amount of time. You know, this is obviously an official event, but politically, on the political side of things, we spent a lot of time recently. And what we really should be doing is focusing more on other things. What I will tell you is one of the interesting things about this also, if you look at kind of what's happening, why things have gotten so polarized, not just as the money, it's really more the redistricting that's happening. The redistricting that happens all over the country. Okay, the Republicans want to create a locked Republican district, the Democrats a locked Democrat district. And really what's interesting to me is that over 500,000 Illinois citizens, 500,000, signed a petition for fair maps. Only be thrown out by the Illinois State Supreme Court. If that doesn't make you angry, I mean, my goodness gracious, that's them kind of throwing out just a revolt against the people. I mean, 500,000 signatures is pretty significant, right? And so those are the types of things that should be put on the ballot. So if you can make it easier for us not to spend the dollars to raise money out there, that'd be fantastic.
And the people who signed that were on both sides of the aisle.
Oh, that's not a partisan thing. That was basically saying we want Republicans and Democrats alike. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, sir.
You know, you're talking about railroad infrastructure. Imagine the Keystone Pipeline coming down, how much that would ease off and give railroad space for other uses other than hauling that down. You know, the carbon footprint, our governor is helping out. He's taking the private jets away from Madigan, Collerton, and all on top of it. So it's kind of the carbon footprint.
Well, what I will tell you, and one of the things that is a concern here locally, and it's one of the things that should be concerning all of us, is concerned about the amount of rail that's coming through and what types of rail is coming through. So literally just had a meeting with some of the local elected officials, and certainly the concern from them. We had mayor's summit just not too long ago, and almost unanimously the mayors were saying this is a concern as we're seeing more and more freight coming through here, more tanker cars. We want to make sure not only that our first responders know what's in them, but frankly, we like to have fewer of them as possible. To your point, that if we have a pipeline like that, that's the safest way for us to transport, as opposed to on trucks or on rail.
The cheapest would cost 1/3 of the money to bring it by pipeline compared to rail.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
So we always hear about partisan
Yeah.
stalemate. And
Yeah.
I'm really anxious for you to give us kind of some of your insight as to what are the projects that are near term to come together, whether it's policy or law changes, something that can improve our economy, kind of give us a little bit of hope that we'll see something
Sure.
in 2015 that shows action.
Sure. So, I mean, the partisan gridlock. No question, is a problem, I think, that everybody sees. And Washington Post just came out with an article that ranked me as one of the most independent bipartisan ones in the entire Congress. I think that's the right way to go. Others may disagree. But ultimately, again, it's trying to be the bridge builder. They're trying to focus on how do we break that gridlock and get some things done. Some things that are going to come down the pipe, which I think are going to be important. I think 21st century cures is going to be coming down. That was something that came out of Energy and Commerce. Really focusing again, I think, on how do we give more dollars into National Institutes of Health for research. Right? Now think about this just for a second. The amount of money that we spend every year to treat diabetes, for instance, we spend over $300 billion a year to treat diabetes. The numbers for Parkinson's and Alzheimer's is on the hockey stick approach in terms of the dollars that we're spending. If we could create a cure for some of those dollars could be spent in other ways. And so we want to make sure that the leading researchers in the world are coming to the United States, that we're enabling them to be able to do some of these things. And so that's what 21st Century Cures should be one of those, another bipartisan deal coming through. Trade, there's bipartisan, again, we want to focus on how do we make that American trade and how do we help American businesses do it. And I do think we have to talk about some immigration reform, of which I'm in favor of, that's going to come down the road. My hope sooner rather than later.
So you see those all for 2015?
Well, certainly I would love to say if we see some more immigration reform in 2015. I don't know if we will. I think 21st Century Cures you'll see in 2015. The trade deal you'll see in 2015. And we need to be focusing on, again, how do we jumpstart the economy and empower small businesses. So you're going to see a lot of those types of things. Some of the tax extenders, research and development. Again, research and development tax, that's going to be a big one. House just passed something, the medical device tax. There was a tax on medical devices that wasn't on profits, it was on revenues. And again, I am in favor of getting rid of the medical device tax. It's a tax on innovation. Okay, another bipartisan bill, right? Those are things that, again, people can get together and be united on. That's something that passed the House. My hope is that it would pass the Senate shortly. So that's stuff that you've already seen. We talked about, again, a bipartisan solution on how do we pay our doctors that are treating Medicare patients. Another bipartisan solution that came through with over 384 members of the House that passed the Senate and the President has already signed into law. So those are some of the things. So I want to make sure that we're giving you some sort of optimism. And I recognize it's not, for many of us, it's still frustrating it's not more. And it's not happening faster because we see neighbors and friends that feel they're falling behind and that they're suffering. Yes, sir.
Actually, I have two questions. One is, what is
Give me the
your
first. Give me the second.
your views on gun control and what is being done to put in tough background checks?
About background checks.
Yeah, what is being done to put in tougher measures on background checks?
I'm delighted that you asked the question. So I've been a proponent of responsible gun ownership with reasonable restrictions. And one of those things that I think we ought to be doing is to be able to put in for commercial sales is background checks. So I am one of just a handful of Republicans that has signed on to a bill that Peter King and Mike Thompson, Peter King, a Republican from New York, Mike Thompson, Democrat from California, came together on. So there's about 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats that are on that right now that talk about background checks. It wouldn't be a background check for giving within family or friends type stuff, but for a commercial sale. That's one of the things that I think is important. Because again, one of the things that I think that should unite us is the fact that we want to reduce handgun violence. Right? Who's in favor of handgun violence?
Who's in favor?
Yeah, nobody's in favor of handgun violence. That should be something that unites us to reduce it. What's your second question?
You thought we should use technology like Google Hangouts and stuff more often.
We should use technology like Google and what more often?
Google Hangout.
Google Hangout more often? Okay. Good suggestion.
Interact with customers.
We'll take that into account. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Are you speaking now of, you want the background, you want this on a national basis, or are you going to use the states?
No, what would happen is that this would, the proposed legislation would be talking about on a commercial sale. Okay, so if it's either on the internet or a commercial sale, that they would do a background check on the individual.
Oh, it does it right now.
Right.
You cannot buy commercially unless you've got an OID card, and you have a background check there.
Right. There are some states that don't do that.
I realize that.
This would be a nationwide.
Would it be a mandate for all the states that have to do it, or would it be under the federal agents, under the auspices of the federal government?
The federal government, is my understanding, would put this out. So, like for instance, Illinois would be fine. So it wouldn't be any change for the state of Illinois if that's the case. Now, we'll talk later. I'll show you the specifics. Yes, ma'am.
I would like to thank you for recognizing the Lake County Forest Preserve District under your vision in your recent statement and the House floor. I really appreciate your comments about providing a healthy and resilient environment for future generations. I'm just wondering if you
and regularly with other members of the region. So I'm happy to sit down with you and talk about kind of what changes you want us to be talking about with them. When it comes to the environment, obviously, we know that we're fortunate. One of the assets that we have here is we look at the Forest Preserve District that we have and gardens. We've got like 185 miles of bike trip through the Forest Preserve. It's a huge asset for us in terms of the quality of life for our families and those that come to visit. So I have not necessarily sat down with other members outside of the area to talk to them about it, but certainly want to talk to them. There's other members that are very proud of the natural resources they have in their districts. But yeah, it's important that we preserve them for sure. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry, hang on. You go first. Yeah, absolutely.
Nationwide, states are embracing school choice in charter schools. In Illinois, we have fully embraced school choice. Choices we do have a big challenge and shutdown. Against that background, we have an ongoing battle in Lake County for school choice. For 15 years, District 50 we've had to shut down Gray Cross, a charter school that's free, public here in Grayslake.
Sure.
The district is trying to shut down the school because they want the money to state grants for school. Under current state law, Gray Crossing is entitled to the money, which amounts to a little more than 3% of the district's school budget. Gray Crossing provides one of the only options for school choice for families who can't afford to pay private school tuition. And if we shut down, children in our school will be negatively affected, and school choice will be further limited in our county. What can you and the state do to help protect school choice here in Grayslake?
It's a great question. So my own take, I have an educational advisory board. The educational advisory board is filled with superintendents and principals and teachers and parents, and it's very active. And one of the things that I think is important to talk about is giving flexibility to districts to be able to do things differently. Right now, as we look at what we have from education policy, we're still operating under No Child Left Behind, which frankly, we should not be operating under. Because what's happening with what they call as AYP, annual yearly progress, is that every single school across the country will be a failing school. That's not good for our students, for our teachers, for our families, to say that they're sending their children to a failing school. And so I do believe that we need to focus on reauthorizing what they call the Elementary Secondary Education Act, which is going to be important. And one of the things that the Educational Advisory Board alluded me to most recently is the fact that here in the state of Illinois, we're one of the only states in the country that uses Title I funds. Okay, Title I funds that oftentimes go to some of the weakest school districts. That if we choose to use those funds to hire a teacher, that the state will take 35% to pay past pension obligations. Past pension obligations. 7.4% will go to current pension obligations. That's right on target. That's what we should do. But consequently, most school districts don't hire teachers now. Okay, and if they think they need to hire teachers, we should allow them to be able to do it. So I took that information from our Educational Advisory Board, who happens to be debating the Elementary Secondary Education Act on the floor of the House. We created an amendment that would prevent the state from taking the 35% or 33% of the time they wanted to raise it to 35, and only allow them to pay current pension obligations, because that's important to be able to pay current pension obligations. But that passed unanimously. So that I think is important, because what it does is it provides more flexibility for our school boards to say, I'd like to hire a teacher or not hire a teacher. When it comes to the choice, I think that what we need to focus on is charters, right? As opposed to giving them an opportunity to take the dollars outside the school district. If you're allowed to take dollars outside the school district, that means most oftentimes the taxpayers are going to pay more. So the fact is that we have some areas where charters are needed. We're seeing charters in very well places. Up in North Chicago, for instance, one charter school up there. So charters are something that I think, again, up to the school board to determine what's going to be possible. But that's obviously what's happening for the council. So that's right. That's what's happening.
The whole district is
Okay.
shut down.
Okay, and then the state said it's okay. So it's obviously going to trump the district.
Can I get a little more information?
Sure.
So the charter school exists and have students from District 50, which is one. And then the state said it's okay to take dollars outside the school district. If you allow the charter school to operate, then the state will have to pay for it. So how does that work?
Sure.
How does that work?
So
Yeah, no, I mean, we want to make sure to allow them to be able to have charter schools to be able to have that choice. But that's going to be something that of course we're going to determine.
Yeah, some residents are interested, I would encourage you to contact your state representative, your state senator, that would be kind of monitoring.
Yes, sir.
The Wall Street Journal reported that we have over 23 million Americans addicted to prescription painkillers. We have an epidemic, and it's turning into secondary a heroin epidemic, because as we start to restrict that supply, they're looking for other sources for their pain medications. We here in Lake County are fortunate to have Mike Mearheim as our state's attorney, and he has headed up a task force called the Opioid Initiative. I'm a part of that. What we're trying to do is find ways of reducing that supply by pulling those unwanted and unused medications out of people's drug habits. One of the things we can do, that maybe help us with, again, we're the home here in Lake County of what, Walgreens, Abbott, Baxter, is if we can ask the Walgreens, these companies that are actually have the pharmacies in our counties, to allow them to take those unwanted, unused medications back. At this point in time, they're not willing to do that.
You can break unwanted medications right here at our police department.
Yes, absolutely.
We'll take it.
Yes, absolutely. But in particular, if we set up something so that we can actually take those unwanted, unused medications back to the pharmacies that sold them to us originally. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that would be great if you want to talk to all of us. What you're talking about is an issue that impacts all of us. In Lake County, Illinois, you're talking about more prescription drugs, but one of the biggest gateways in America, is prescription drugs. Lake County, Illinois is the worst county in the country for heroin. Nationwide. This is not something that we find in back alleys. This is something that, again, is coming across the border. Years ago, at 3 to 8% pure, it's coming across the border today at 70 to 80% pure. We have more overdoses here than any other county in the country. This is an enormous problem. I sit on a task force with Mike Mearheim and with others to try to combat what we're seeing right now with heroin. It's cheaper than cigarettes. You choose to use it once. It's extraordinarily addictive. And so one of the initiatives obviously is, well, I shouldn't say obviously, one of the initiatives that we're trying to do is get naloxone, into the hands of first responders so that they're able to use it. There's a couple different ways to do it. One is walks you through to make it easier for first responders to be able to get that dose of naloxone. The other one is the nasal one, something Senator Kirk has talked about, trying to make it super easy for them. Again, what's up, naloxone?
So if they're about to die,
If they're unresponsive, they get naloxone. We've already had a number of lives saved, the police force here in Lake County. But again, you're highlighting a huge issue. And again, oftentimes you see it if you go back home today and look at your medicine cabinet, chances are you may find some prescription drugs that you were prescribed and just didn't use them. And it's a problem for young people as they're going to parties. Oftentimes they'll go into somebody else's medicine cabinet. I mean, it's a very, very real problem. And one of the things also, as we talk about Oxycontin, Oxycodone, and those others, I will tell you that right now the FDA allows moderate to severe pain for some of these drugs. Some of these drugs are absolutely needed for some of the pain that people have. But if we're talking about moderate to severe, I've been one that says it should be for severe pain. What's moderate pain? That's a pretty big, wide swath that you can prescribe those prescription drugs for. So it's an enormous issue that frankly we need to do an education job on. We need to have every parent understand what's going on. We need to have every school district know what's going on. Talk about this heroin epidemic and the prescription drugs that are driving. So I'm getting a hook right here.
Yeah, you have to be a little strict for our community. We can take one last question.
Okay, one last question. Yes, sir.
Back to business jobs.
Yeah.
I spent most of my career in the law operation, and it really unnerved me how often the sourcing decisions were based on taxes. Where you paid less than these taxes, where you got the most percent, were based on logical business decisions. As you and leaders of Washington massage our business taxes, try to remove that from them. It's just something we're going to pay a tax. Rather than being
Sure. No. I mean, when it comes down to the business taxes, the corporate taxes, I think we got to go back to, we want to make sure that we're competitive
We want to make sure that American businesses are competitive. Because when American businesses are competitive, we're going to win. We've got an incredible workforce. If we're able to compete on all those other there's no doubt in my mind that we'll be able to make it here, ship it all over the world. We'll be able to win. They create more American jobs, and that's really the name of the game. Because again, ultimately, this is why I want to thank you for coming on. Ultimately, kind of what drives me to this idea is that we need to make sure that we are leaving our country better for the next generation. I have 3 children, a 13-year-old, 11-year-old, and an 8-year-old. And I am terrified that I may be that first generation of Americans that leaves the country worse. For me, it's unacceptable, right? And it should be unacceptable for everybody. It's what I call the American compact. We're going to leave the country better off for that next generation. And so I really want to thank you for coming out. I want to enlist your help, right? This is about us, right? I'm your voice in Washington, but this is about us solving problems right here. Working with the mayor, working with the village board, working with the township, working with school boards, whatever it may be. This is about us, not them, right? So we need to be united and kind of marching forward to solve the big problems. Get us to the solution to this problem. Thank you so much for coming out today. I really, it's not